Okay, guys, sorry about that. For whatever reason, it absolutely was a mess trying to get this up and get it going. I'm sorry it took 16 minutes for me to figure it out. Apparently, there was a problem with how OBS was logging me into YouTube. I apologize for that. I hope everybody gets this. I'm going to wait a few minutes. And then yeah, finally, now I am in. Yes, now you can actually see me in the background. Before, I guess the only thing that was coming up was the YouTube thumbnail. Sorry about that. Um, I'm glad at least I've got one person who can see me. Before, I couldn't get anybody to see me. Rainy North Florida. Yeah, I understand Florida is a little rainy today. I wish it wasn't. I had planned to actually go down there this weekend, but it didn't work out because of a number of other issues. But I will hope for better weather for you for the rest of the day. I uh, I know what it's like to go to Florida and have bad weather. Kelly, glad to see you made it. Thanks again for being here. I'm sorry it was late. Like I said, I had a devil of a time trying to get this thing set up. Um, Apparently, it had logged me into a different YouTube account. I have a personal YouTube account and I have my channel. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, it had logged me into the wrong one. And I could see the live stream and I could see the control panel and all that. I was really, really frustrated with that. Beautiful in Southeast Texas. Well, Southeast Texas is one of the more beautiful parts of that state. I guess the part down by the seacoast with all the industry is not real pretty, but always think of Southeast Texas as including Bandera and the hill country. It doesn't rain in Sarasota. Yeah, well, I wish that was true. Well, I guess I really don't. Probably a good thing that it does rain. I think everybody needs to have some rain to take the benefit of growing plants and that kind of stuff. Hello from North Georgia. Well, thank you. I am so glad you are here. If you wonder what I'm doing here, I'm trying to give myself a bolus of insulin because my monitor's going off. So, with all of that being said, I thought maybe I would try to pop up the things I decided I wanted to talk about today and see if we can get started with some of it. Um, one of the things I wanted to talk about was this San Antonio police officer prosecution. And somebody mentioned in the, um, oops, wait a minute, lost the chat. There we go. Somebody mentioned in the chat or in the comments the other day that they thought maybe the state was trying to blow the case because they don't really want to see these officers held accountable. So they're making mistakes and that kind of thing in the hopes that the judge will let them off the hook and rule against them and they can come out to the public and say, well, we tried everything, but it's that darn judge. I don't think that's going to work, but might wind up doing that. Because if you were trying to make it look like it was somebody else's fault that you lost the case, I'm not sure you'd be doing anything different. First of all, they have these stupid objections. They object to leading questions in a cross examination. That just doesn't make any sense. They put on witnesses who were not prepared, and one guy who just mumbled all of his answers. He made a terrible witness, and I don't think he impressed anybody. And then you have this issue where they were threatening a witness with prosecution. And again, this is that case involving the three police officers who shot a lady who was having a schizophrenic episode in Texas. So I forgot to mention that earlier, but I assumed everybody knew what we were talking about. Um, and then they were forced to grant immunity to the witnesses who are still going to testify to make sure that they weren't pressured to lie. And they did that in order to avoid being swept up if they told something that the prosecution didn't want to hear, because that's exactly what Officer Salinas testified to the other day, essentially that he was threatened with a prosecution for burglary if he didn't, toe the line. Then there are these personal attacks on the defense counsel, which are, I think, Again, something that you don't normally see. Normally, you see a fairly professional relationship, but this could be complicated by the fact that you have the former DA representing the defendants and the current DA helping to prosecute this case. And so as a result, people's careers are on the line and their jobs are on the line. And for that reason, I think you've got a little more tension in there than there might otherwise be. Now, is it here's another thing that really bothers me. And I'm not normally somebody who finds racism behind every lamppost, but is it just a coincidence, or does anybody else notice that everybody else in this case, except so far the fire captain, is Hispanic? That that is really an unusual situation. I realize they have a high percentage of officers in San Antonio who are Hispanic because they have a very large Hispanic population down there. But it looks a lot like they are targeting the Hispanics in this case, which again is an ugly look for them. So that was one thing I wanted to talk about. If anybody has any questions about that, stick them out there in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Um, then the next thing I wanted to know, and again, you guys have to tell me if this is valuable or not. Um, the postscript videos. What do you think the proper length of those ought to be? I'm kind of torn because I'd like to keep them to right at about 7 minutes. 7 minutes is one of those cutoffs for the the monetization issues on YouTube. But I also don't want to go on too long because, again, it's just supposed to be a brief summary of what happened. Would really appreciate some feedback on that. You can drop it in the chat here, or if you'd like, drop me an email. You guys know the email address. It's aldewit7@gmail.com. Again, I'd appreciate any feedback you'd like to share. And then we have Bianca Ellis. What a wild case that was. Um, Hi, Tammy. So we got Linda here, Christina Anthony. All right, North Georgia. Good. Um, Bianca Ellis, I guess that people who are schizophrenic, who have some kind of mental pathology where they're controlled on medications, but also not completely controlled. There is no method that I'm aware of that can make somebody stay on their medications. And I'm reasonably sure that on those medications, they don't feel like themselves. Hey, Jim, nice to see you here. Sorry I had it all screwed up there at the beginning. Um, when you look at how she was acting on the body cam versus how she was in court, you could tell that she was on something that just kind of took all of the emotion out of her. And of course, the first time she showed up in court, she was grinning from ear to ear. Um, and that clearly was not a good look. And of course, that's the picture that Court TV used to promote the trial. In that case, and I'd like to hear what you guys think, I did not think that the prosecution was nearly as aggressive as it should have been. And I don't think that it got, and of course, that could be due to the judge too. You never know when you're looking at it from the outside looking in what kind of pretrial rulings they've received, what kinds of evidence is going to be suppressed, what kind of evidence from the defense is going to get in that maybe it shouldn't get in. And of course, that limits what you can do and what you can say. Now, body cameras are great in terms of the interactions that they have with the defendant at the time. And I don't know at this point that there has been any attempt to address the Fifth Amendment issue that arises in the context of body cameras. Because it seems to me that even though everybody knows that police wear body cameras, people still say things on those body cameras that can be used against them. And they do that before they've been advised of their Miranda rights. and most of the time before they're ever even in custody. Now, once you're in custody and oh, pardon me, I had to take a sinus pill this morning and it's making me yawn a lot. Um, Once you're in custody and they start asking you questions, that can't be used against you if they haven't advised you of your rights. But if you are just detained and nobody asks you questions, it's a little bit of a gray area. Now, I don't think it is a gray area. I think it is pretty black and white that that should not be used against you. Because you, first of all, in most cases, you haven't been advised that there's a body camera on. And if you had been, you probably wouldn't have said anything. So there's an issue there. At some point, that's going to reach the Supreme Court, and they're going to say one way or the other where that comes down. But you couldn't have watched that trial and the body camera videos in that trial, even though they were blurred on YouTube, and come away with the idea that she was necessarily insane at the time. She was certainly not right. But on the one hand, she sought out the knives and then she went next door to the grocery store and she sought out the victims. And then she chose them, she attacked them, she killed them, and she smiled and laughed afterwards. Was that insanity or was that an attempt to perhaps demonstrate insanity? Hi, Loretta. No, you're not late. I'm late. I didn't get this on at 1 o'clock like I intended to. I had some difficulties with my streaming software. Sorry about that. Um, and so, was it insanity or was it evil when she killed those folks? And of course, the prosecutor said it was evil, and the defense said it's a poor lady. She has all kinds of mental issues, and it's the mental issues that are work. Thank you, sir. Black Panther says 8 minutes. All right, that's what I'm going to shoot for on those postscript videos. Then, thank you so much for that. Um, Someone also commented that I had no right to label it the correct verdict. And because every verdict that a jury reaches is the correct verdict because it's the verdict of the jury. Well, I may have been inartful. Um, I have never on this channel criticized a jury verdict. I have sometimes criticized the way that they got to that verdict through the prosecutors. A good example there is Colin Griffiths. I thought the evidence proved that he had committed murder. But at the end of the day, because he had very good counsel, he was able to get off. And uh, I can't disagree with the verdict, right? Because that's the verdict of the jury and it's law, and I'm fine with that. But I did disagree with the lackadaisical attitude of the prosecuting attorney who thought this was just a walk in the spring breeze. And as a result of that, as a result of that arrogance, I thought that made the difference and why I thought in that case they got a bad result, even though, like I said, it was the correct result. Well, when I make a determination as to whether the jury got it right or got it wrong, which I did make a determination that they got it right, I think I have every right as a public citizen to make that determination, as do each of you. But when you make that determination, what you are actually saying, if the jury got it wrong, that the person was acquitted when they should have been convicted, in your opinion, then what you're really saying is that the prosecution didn't do its job. Because if the prosecution had done its job, then there would have been a conviction. So, in that situation where at some time in the future I might say, well, the jury got this one wrong, it will be the wrong result for the public. It's still the right verdict because that's the verdict they reached. It's really a criticism of the prosecution team. And I've had a lot of problems, I think, with certain defenders and how they went about defending people. I thought the guy who'd argued in the case where the young lady was killed, the garbage truck driver, I just I thought the death penalty argument in that case was hideous and was deserving of sanction. But again, I do think the jury got the right result there. Another issue that I wanted to talk about was the Daisy Link case. So I thought maybe we would grade the lawyers and the witnesses. Um, I thought the prosecution's witnesses were fairly professional and did a fairly decent job, but the I thought their actions and their attitude were, in many respects, inappropriate and not professional in the way that they went after the defense attorney. Now, the defense attorney didn't do himself any favors in that regard because he did sort of try to use a little bit of drama. And, when he was out there shouting, "I'm ready to die," and things like that, I don't think he helped his case. And I don't think he helped really in the long run to have the right result for his client if what he wanted was an acquittal. Um, so I gave the prosecution a C minus. I gave the defense a B minus. But at the end of the day, again, the jury reached the right result there. It's kind of an unfortunate result because I don't think she actually intended it to be murder. I don't think she intended to kill him. And I thought the defense did a little bit of a bad job in not making that distinction. Hey, she wasn't trying to kill him. She was trying to scare him away. And yeah, as a result, he died, but it wasn't an intentional act. And the prosecution did do a fairly decent job of explaining that she had lied about everything. And of course, when you lie about anything, it makes you look like a liar because you are a liar. And that was a bad look. And I think that's probably why, as I said before, she probably got convicted. And I think if she'd given her lawyer less lies to work with, less lies to overcome, she might have prevailed on juror sympathy because they would naturally have sympathy for somebody who was beaten and abused by somebody who was an ex spouse. But again, it was the cross examination of her testimony that sealed her fate. She pulled what I would call an Alex Murdaugh and tried to explain things in ways that just didn't make any sense. And I thought that came through pretty clearly in the both in the direct and in the cross examination. But again, I don't want to judge her too harshly because uh, she was a victim of spousal abuse and domestic violence, and a lot of times that skews your thinking about remedies that are available. But I do think it's really odd that she valued her children having a father more than she valued his own life. And again, I'm not sure I'm not sure what I would have told my daughter in that situation, but I hope I wouldn't have told her to break out a gun. Um, and then the other case I wanted to talk about was Leslie, the deputy down in uh, Ocala, Florida, who shot his girlfriend. And I guess I wasn't paying close enough attention in the early phases of the trial. I didn't realize that she was shot when she was naked. Generally speaking, you don't ask somebody to teach you about guns while you are unclothed. Generally, there are other thoughts that occupy your mind. And so that strikes me as a really, really odd situation. And then there's the weapon. Uh, he let her point a 9 millimeter at him, but he points a 223 at close range at her head. Well, a shot like that is not survivable. A shot into the chest with a 9 millimeter is no picnic, I can assure you, but it is usually survivable if you get immediate treatment. Um, there, the thing that I thought that caused me to wonder about is, was he trying to make sure there wasn't going to be any problematic witness after this quote unquote accident? And third, others have pointed out that the comments that evening that are caught on the body camera appeared rehearsed and overly dramatic. And I didn't see that the first time I watched the video. But when I went back and watched the body camera video a second time, I could certainly see how somebody could get to that understanding. Um, so those are the things that I wanted to talk about today. And does anybody have any subject they would like to talk about? Because again, this needs to be two-way communication here, if at all possible. And it's been a while since we've had a anybody who posted anything in the chat. I hope the chat's still running. Um, I'm guessing that nobody has any questions. I did find this afternoon that the Marcy case, the Marcy, New York corrections officer case that I talked about the opening statements on, was still going on. I found the closing arguments, and I'm going to do a video, and I'm going to put out a video on those closing arguments. It'll either be today or tomorrow. And when I do that, I'm going to include segments from that, and I think you'll find it interesting. Here's the most interesting thing. The jury has been deliberating constantly for 3 days and still doesn't have a verdict. According to some local news sources, one of the things that seems to be hanging them up is, yeah, a very odd situation, nakedness with guns. Um, One of the things that seems to be hanging them up was this thing that about a gang, about them being part of a gang. I don't know whose idea that was to put in there as a charge, but I thought that was entirely dumb. They asked a couple of questions about that, and then they stopped asking questions about that, and they sent in other questions to the judge. It's hard to it's hard to read those tea leaves rather. I think it's really hard to think about what the jury must be thinking, but I think they discarded the gang issue and they're working now through some of the other issues. I think the prosecutor in the Marcy case used too much sarcasm. Well, you know, that's certainly one of those things that you have to be really careful about. It's okay to use irony and it's okay to use a little bit of sarcasm. But sarcasm is the lowest form of humor other than, you know, personal attacks about how people look. And as a result of that, I think, if it was too much sarcasm, I haven't seen the video yet, not the whole video. But when I find that video and look at it, if I think it's too much sarcasm, Loretta, I'm going to import your observation into that video because I think that's important. And actually, I think a lot of the really good content that I've seen come on the comments section has been from people who really understand what's going on and offer a different approach or a different view on things. Even people who disagree with me. I mean, it doesn't bother me that people disagree. I may think you're wrong, but I'm not going to call you names. Um, and I think you add something to the discussion because this is supposed to be a discussion. The channel is supposed to be a discussion. Um, Naked Gun is a movie, but don't try this at home. Emily, that's exactly right. Naked with a gun, I guess, might be the better way to to talk about that. Kind of makes you wonder if he was clothed at the time. And that's another odd thing that stands out. Why would he be completely clothed and she not have any clothes on at all? That just doesn't make any sense. I wish I was at the beach. Well, so do I, Beverly. I'm stuck up in Auburn, Alabama today. We have the grandkids this week. Their mom and dad are going down to the land of the giant rat, Walt Disney World, to run in a Disney race down there. And so we're going to have them all week, and we have to be up here. I would much prefer to be down at the beach. The beach is sort of my happy place, as you can see behind me. It's definitely my happy place. Uh, Beverly Baloney says, and not in Massachusetts. I have, for some reason, I wound up getting on the Boston Herald's feed out of their paper. And I keep seeing all these articles about all of the problems that keep coming up and keep getting discussed in the Boston Herald. And it does seem like Boston has a lot of both political and sort of corporate problems with their police departments, with their public works departments, with their different agencies. I certainly think they need a new commander for the highway patrol or the state police, whatever it is they call them. I guess there aren't that many highways in Massachusetts, so you could just have state police. Uh, but it seems odd that, man, and again, it's a matter of what you see that that really makes a difference in how you feel. You're a doll. Someday, can you tell us about cases you were involved in? Well, Beverly, I've done that several times. I've talked about several of the cases that I've been involved in, and several of them are actually quite funny or have funny moments in them. Um, all right. John says he was just in Miramar Beach for the Styx concert. Beautiful place. Yes, absolutely. So I will tell you a story about an early case that I handled when I had left the firm that I was in Overland Park, Kansas, and I had moved back to Jefferson City, where I had been a clerk for a Supreme Court judge, and I knew a lot of people, and I thought this would be a good place to practice. And the guy who ran the local Ramada Inn hotel was a guy who also happened to be the clerk of the Supreme Court, and he knew me, and he said, "Hey, I've got a great case for you. It's probably not going to do much in terms of a fee for you, but at the very least, you'll get some exposure. You'll get to know the judges." So the issue had to deal with a young man who had um, a child, and the child's mother was not addressing an issue with weight loss. The kid was like 10, 12 months old, and he wasn't gaining any weight, which either indicates a metabolic problem or it indicates that he's not being fed the right amount of food. And it could be because she didn't have a lot of money. I don't know. But at any rate, what I did was she wouldn't let him see the child. And I went and got a temporary restraining order. And to get the temporary restraining order, I just went in front of the judge with my pleadings and I took an affidavit from the young man and put it in front of the judge. And he granted me this temporary restraining order and he set a hearing for 10 days out. Well, in Missouri, they have a rule that says if you grant a temporary restraining order, anybody can petition to have it dissolved the next day. So that's what someone went to legal aid and got a legal aid lawyer, and the legal aid person came in and filed that. Well, I had gone to speak at a conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. That's where the American Association of Respiratory Care was holding its annual convention, and I was an invited speaker. And so, even though I didn't really want to, I had to fly back early from that in order to get things taken care of. So when I got back, I prepared to go into court. I got the client. We went into court, and we had this judge by the name of Judge Kinder. Now, I'm not even sure he's still alive any longer. He was about 80 at the time. He was an auxiliary judge, or I guess they call them it's, it's somebody who is not being paid to be a circuit judge any longer. They're just there to handle cases when and if there is an overload and they need somebody to hear them. So that was where this docket was. And I went in front of Judge Kinder and I laid out the situation. And the guy from the uh, public defender's law, or not public defenders, the legal aid office kept interrupting me. Well, you're not supposed to do that. You make your case, he makes his case, you get a rebuttal, and then the judge makes a decision. It's the way it's always supposed to go. So he kept interrupting me, and Judge Kinder looks at him, and you have to understand this woman came in with her family, and her family looked like central casting for a remake of, gosh, I'm trying to think of the basically a story about vagrants, a remake of Oliver, for example. And Judge Kinder stopped him in mid sentence and said, "Hey, answer my question. How come is it that when you show up in my courtroom, that area over there," and he points to the gallery where all the other people are, and he says, "That looks like the cantina scene out of Star Wars. You're not supposed to laugh in court." I could not keep it in, and everybody who wasn't in the gallery laughed. The clerk laughed, the court reporter laughed. And to make a long story short, the injunction stayed in place, and we wound up negotiating some kind of an agreement that would fix it later on. And the young man and that young woman were able to work out their differences, and they were able to co-parent, and the child has now graduated from high school, and I think he's in college, and they've just had, I guess she's had a good life, and certainly my first client there in Jeff City has had a good life. But that line about makes it look like the cantina scene out of Star Wars. I mean, other than the little guy playing the flute, the fluty looking thing, that was it. And absent the music, I mean, the cantina scene was the right metaphor for that. Um, so that's my funny story out of legal practice. I've had a lot of did a lot of stuff for people who were charged with debt collection problems. They had uh, issues with people calling them up and telling them that they were going to send the sheriff for them, which is both true and false because the sheriff does deliver a summons and it says you're being sued, but the sheriff isn't there to arrest you. They do show up in uniform, of course, but they're not there to arrest you. So they use a lot of trickery and deceit to collect some of those debts. And, um, on their side of the coin, I can understand some of these people are just absolute deadbeats and are never going to pay anything. But for the people who just fell behind from one reason or another, like a divorce, it doesn't do any good to do that kind of thing to them because it just makes them even more intransigent. Funny but good ending. Yeah, I thought so. Um, and one of the things that I learned, I didn't really know it at the beginning as I started practicing law. But one of the things that I learned fairly quickly is that negotiation and trying to get everybody to a win-win situation, or at least not a lose-lose situation, was better because any settlement is better than a good jury verdict because you never know what a jury is going to decide. Now, some cases it's very easy to make the decision to take it on to trial because you never get an offer to settle. If you do get an offer to settle, you go to the client, you say, evaluate this, tell me what you think, and then we'll go from there. And sometimes clients jump at the first amount of money that's offered. And I always tell them, look, I can go back and do the could you, would you thing. If I can get my client to accept $20,000, would you be willing to offer $20,000? We're not rejecting your offer. But if that's the case, could you, would you? And a lot of times that works. But a lot of times too, people just take the first offer and say, "No, don't do anything. If you could do anything to blow this, I don't want you to do it. Just get me the money." People have a lot of trouble in their lives sometimes with money, and money is a huge cause of concern. It's one of the primary things that causes couples to divorce. Misallocated priorities, I think, is a big part of that. And as a result, that's one of the reasons why I tried very hard to help people who had that problem, particularly if they were in a otherwise stable marriage. I wanted to try and keep them together. Um, my text name is based on Higgins texting Karen at the waterfall that evening. That's another thing that has surprised me at how much interest even the civil case that Karen Reed is bringing is causing. I hope that they will allow that one to be live streamed because that's going to be a hoot. I mean, pop yourself up a couple of bags of popcorn and store them in Ziploc bags because there's going to be a lot of fun watching that trial. Anybody else have any questions or issues they'd like to discuss? Cases? Like I said, I'm going to apologize again and tell you how sorry I am that I had this issue with the streaming software. To this moment, I don't know what caused that, but the uh, the problem's been fixed now, and hopefully it will not occur again. I don't know what else to say. Here's a question for you. How many of you guys watch body cam videos? I know there are a lot of people who consider what we do to be true crime. Ah, I can't find the button to get a membership. Is that available? Well, in order to get a membership, the issue there is you have to be able to provide something additional to people because nobody wants to just come here and pay a fee for what they could get free. So you have to prefer to release, you have to set it up so that you can release videos first to that group of members. And I can do that. I just have never figured anybody would be interested in joining. And maybe I'm wrong about that. If I'm wrong, let me know. I would love to know. So Eileen says, "Me, what can what can I do for you, Eileen?" Uh, I do watch them. Okay, good, Jim. I I love watching these body cam videos because people are so stupid. I saw one last night from Okaloosa County. Okaloosa County is the county to the immediate west of Walton County, which is where Miramar Beach is, and it's also where Hurlbut Field is. And this Air Force periodontist was driving and she was going 63, I think, in a 45 mile an hour zone. And the, I'm sorry, I shouldn't read while I'm doing this, but be careful eating while watching Massachusetts Trial. You could easily choke and then gasp in shock and hurrah. Uh, It's kinda like, you should never stand near a window in Russia because people tend to have a problem falling out of them. Um, this lady was clearly intoxicated, and she refused to roll down her window, of course, which would have revealed that she was intoxicated, and she refused to step out of the car, which Pennsylvania versus Mims, you gotta step out of the car, and, so they called a supervisor, and I think the deputy that was handling it was being very, very solicitous, calling her colonel and yes, ma'am, and all that. And then the supervisor came up and said, "Are you going to roll down this window? Are you going to step out of this car?" And the answer to both was more questions. And he turns to the deputy and said, "Bust the window and pull her out." And that's what they did. And the other thing I love is to see the taser deployments, where somebody is giving them trouble or screaming at them or whatever, and they hit them with a taser. And then my third favorite, of course, is what donut operator calls the bork bork nom noms, where they sick the dogs on them when they're running away. It's a great line in the Justified series where the guy says, "Hey, you shot me in the back," and he said, "Well, if you wanted to get shot in the front, you should have been running toward me." Um, that that happens, and so anyway, if you wanted to not get bit, you shouldn't have run in the first place. I guess that's the what I meant to say. I meant shock and horror with a Canton soccer mom accent. Oh, you mean like shock and horror? I don't think I could do a Boston soccer mom. My impressions of Boston are basically I'm gonna park my car and go into the bar for a beer. It's like they just can't seem to get that R in there or something. I don't know. Arkansas has the pit down to a science. Jim's absolutely right. If you get a chance to see the Arkansas videos, those are exquisite. There are a couple of states that do pits really well. Arkansas, probably the best. Florida is a good one. Georgia is a good one. They do good pits in Georgia. And some of the northern states, they will follow those people till their tires fall off and won't pit them. A lot of them won't pit above 40 miles an hour. So, if you're running away, you just have to drive more than 45 miles an hour and try to escape the cops. It's kind of funny. Um, Boston people don't have accents. Y'all do. You know, funny you should mention that. When my wife went to teach in Jefferson City, she'd taught down here in Alabama for 18 years when she went up to Missouri to teach. And she obviously found people talked a little different than what she was used to listening to down in Alabama. And she heard one of the kids say something to the effect of, "Y'all, you talk funny." And she said, "I don't talk funny. Y'all talk funny." And I thought that was funny at the time. But then toward the end of that school year, she came home from work and she was laughing and she said, "You're not going to believe what happened today." I said, "What's that?" "Well, I told somebody to get back to work, and one of the students stood up and looked at her peers and said, 'Y'all get back to work.'" And then she said, "Oh, no, I'm talking just like Miss DeWitt," which I thought was pretty funny. I love accents. I think the reason I love them is because they sort of tether you to a location or a place. And of course, having grown up more or less all over the world, I don't necessarily see an accent in my own voice. I kind of have that flat Midwestern newscaster twang that maybe doesn't show up as much as it should. My wife gives me a lot of trouble because growing up, my grandmother and my Aunt Naoma would wash the clothes, and there's no R in wash. And so a lot of times I'll slip up and say wash, and she'll go, "Oh," she'll make big time fun of me for that. But I don't mind. I know she loves me. You don't tease people you don't love usually. Uh, Maybe not Boston, but definitely Canton. So, anyway, back to the pits. I love to watch the pits because that's one way to end a police chase. The other thing they have is this new device called the grappler. And some of you may have seen it, but basically it's a thing that they put on the front end of a police car. And it is hardwired or hard attached to the frame of the police vehicle. And it has a thing that what they extend it out and it catches the back tire of the car that's running away, and then it wraps up the back tire and it stops them. And if you try to run after that, you pull your axle off. I have seen an episode of that happening. So I'm all for stopping chases. I had a client once who was very badly injured and who lost his wife in a police chase. Now they weren't running from anybody, but the criminal who had essentially a registration violation. In other words, her car was not registered, but they knew where she lived. They chased her. And at 75 miles an hour, she broadsided this older couple. I think they were 75 and 82 in a minivan and killed the woman and seriously injured the man. And so we sued St. Francis County in southern, well, I guess it's eastern and southern Missouri for this violation. And we were thrown out on a motion to dismiss, and I took the appeal, and we got that reversed. So hopefully at some point they recovered. Warsh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, there are places in Missouri where it's pretty redneck. You know, you as my one of my former bosses used to say, you could poke out both eyes with a fork. So uh, it's like that scene in Deliverance where the guy's playing the guitar. Chases are out of hand, not like in the 90s and before. You know, they really do seem to have a lot more chases than they used to. Um, my favorite chase of all time, of course, was O.J. Simpson's chase, where he was, being chased after, and I think he held a gun to his head. Maybe it's hard to remember all of it, but I thought it was hilarious and exercise, and it seemed to me like it was right out of the Naked Gun series that he starred in. What a waste of life. Yeah. Um, there are a lot of people who are sorry excuse for an entity that does no more than exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen. Well, it's about oh, the white Bronco. Yeah, that's right. It was a white Bronco. I do remember that. That was a really interesting case, and I went back to see if there was any video in it because I thought it might make a neat historical thing to do, and there is, but it's like 380. The definition on it is terrible. I had a teacher in the US, from the US, who told us about teaching in Australia and some of the words and phrases she had to learn. She had a student ask for some rubbers, meaning erasers. Yeah, there are some teachers in America who come from places where rubbers wouldn't necessarily be what you would think of. You might think of the boots that you pull up in. When I lived in South Dakota, people would call the galoshes that they put on over their shoes to walk in the winter, they called them rubbers because they were principally rubber. But of course, there is also a different connotation for that is applied below the belt and toward the midline, but only on males usually. So let's see. Emily is a great contributor here. She always makes us laugh. I have to say I appreciate that. She thought of a Trojan brand. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think they're probably one of the more popular brands. Always I always think that they ought to put that like the place that sells those like right next to the Bibles in the drugstore, so that people would have it's like that image of the two buttons, that push one or push the other. Anyway, when I was a kid, they were rain overshoes. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Al Cowlings was in the Bronco doing the negotiating. He remembers this much better than I do. Thank you, Well. Ah, Al Cowlings. Yeah, another name I'd forgotten. Who was the guy who was the one who lived with him or lived in the condo there with him who didn't live in their part of the living space, but was a witness for the prosecution? I can't remember his name. The surfer dude is kind of what he came off as. He was he was an odd duck. I'll say that for him. I was trying to think of another funny story from uh, the time when I've been a lawyer, but I actually have a lot of funny stories, but they're from a series of different careers, Cato Kalin, that's it. Yeah, Cato Kalin. Yeah, what an odd fellow. I mean, I thought he testified honestly, if weirdly. I'm not sure that necessarily is an endorsement, but uh, I was in the military. I did that. Got out of the military, went into healthcare. All kinds of strange stories in healthcare. Uh, I had gone to do a video on a story from when I was in the military, uh, which was pretty funny. I thought I sure hope I haven't actually published it. Gosh, it'd be strange to do that, but I decided I thought maybe it was uh, too off-putting. But you guys seem to be a very friendly bunch, so I'll tell you the story. Uh, we were I was on the honor guard, so whenever somebody who was a service member, an active duty service member, was buried anywhere in the town area near where the fort was, we would go out and provide the honor guard, and there'd be 6 pallbearers and then 7 riflemen to do the 21 gun salute. And always there was a military chaplain who came and did the prayer over the casket and said some wonderful things about him. And then his job was to, when we folded up the flag, we handed him the flag and he would present it to the widow. Um, and once we got the flag folded and handed to him, he would turn to the group and say, "Please prepare yourself for the military honors that will follow," which of course was the 21 gun salute. So you have a group of soldiers standing off about 50 to 100 yards away, and they are told, ready, aim, fire, aim, fire, aim, fire. They do it 3 times, 7 guns, 21 gun salute. And on the first volley, as we're standing there at the casket, at the, behind me, this woman fainted, and I could hear her hit the floor, but I was at attention. And in this particular instance, we didn't have a military chaplain. We had a chaplain that had been supplied by the family, and he had never been to one of these types of funerals before, so he didn't know what was coming. And somebody behind me yelled, "They shot Grandma!" And everybody started getting under the chairs, diving to the ground. And of course, we're all just standing right there. And after a couple of minutes, people realized, that was the 21 gun salute, and they got up and brushed off their clothes. And I'm sure they were kind of embarrassed by that. But again, it was something we had to laugh about by the time we got to the bus. You didn't dare laugh about it at the time, but it does. Odd things happen. Odd things happen in the military. Odd things happen in hospitals. Uh, when I worked in Florida at Our Lady of Perpetual Billing, uh, I had a nurse practitioner named Noreen who worked with me. I hope she's still out there practicing nursing. She was a great nurse, but she was a nurse clinician. And so she had the ability to do things that regular nurses didn't. So a lot of times she was the first one at the code when someone went into cardiac arrest, and she would run the drugs and follow the ACLS protocols while I managed the airway. I would intubate them and breathe for them. And anytime she saw me working in the ICU, she would go, "Oh, you again." So I started doing the same thing. "Oh, you again." Because every time I worked with that woman, I swear we had somebody who needed our services of that nature. And so they started calling the two of us the angels of death, which was not a happy moniker if you're in the healthcare field. So, um, true stories from the front lines of today's healthcare. Yeah, they shot grandma. That's funny. Yeah, yeah. It was funny after the fact. I don't think anybody thought it was funny at the time. Um, we did. The guy who was in charge of the rifle team did catch the chaplain at the end, and he said, "Hey, if you ever do this again, you might want to mention the fact that we're going to fire a 21 gun salute and to get ready for it." And he explained to him how he could do that. Made a big difference. I'm a retired family practice physician assistant. All right. Family practice, primary care. My daughter is a pediatrician, and she's involved in primary care, although not this coming week. She's going to be down in Florida at the Land of the Giant Rat running those races. I wonder if they call them rat races. I don't think they do. Uh, I've had a very interesting career. Yeah, what's funny about it is, I was talking with my boss when I interviewed with him for a clerkship at the Supreme Court. He said, "Tell me about yourself." So I went through a lot of that. And he said, "Let me see if I get this right. You were in the military, right? You got out of the military, you went into healthcare, right? You went to Florida, right? You came back to Illinois. You went to Ohio or Connecticut, and then you went back to Ohio, and now you're back in St. Louis to go to law school." I said, "Yes." And he said, "So could you just not keep a job?" I said, "No, there was always something better just over the horizon." And the funny thing is, when I actually started working full time for him, that desire to go explore the country and do different jobs in different places left me entirely. And I spent basically 20 years in Jefferson City and the last 10 down here in Florida because they allowed me to work remotely. And I want to point out that Loretta, as a retired family practice physician assistant, has probably also had a very interesting field, interesting career field. Yeah, military, medical, and legal. Yeah, it's an odd mix. Although it did make it easy for me to get jobs with plaintiffs' law firms because most of them have to occasionally deal with a medical malpractice case, and most of them don't understand how to read medical records, really. Um, it's very easy for, particularly if the law firm requesting the records is not somebody that is recognized as a medical malpractice firm. Now, the Barnum's firm that I worked for was always recognized as a great malpractice firm. But if they're not recognized that way, then they'll just send you the well, for example, they will send you the intake paperwork, history and physical, statement of problem, that kind of stuff, and the discharge paperwork. And they won't send you all the rest of it. You'll have to go back and ask for it a second time. So knowing how to read records and knowing what's supposed to be in them and knowing what's not is really important. We had a situation once where uh, almost all get gut blood gas machines, which measure the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your blood, almost all of them print a paper ticket. Now, sometimes they use that paper ticket and they just tape it to the lab result and send it on. But now, as we've been more computerized, a lot of them will enter it into the computer and send it that way. Well, in this particular case, the blood gases didn't make any sense whatsoever. They were, technically speaking, you couldn't have had a blood gas that way, and because that's not the way the acid-base system works in the body. And so I told them to request the actual printouts of the log, and the hospital at that point determined that it would be a good idea perhaps to settle the case at that point. Um, I was collecting experience. Hello, Lisa from Missouri. I had a wonderful secretary named Lisa who lived in Missouri when we were there in Missouri, and she did a great job for us. She founded a group that provides dogs to courts. And it may sound like dogs in courts would not be a good thing, but she does that for children who are abused or are neglected and may have to give testimony. And so, in order to help them through the process of giving testimony, she had a sweet little dog named Olive. And that dog would crawl up in their lap and they would pet the dog, while they were giving their testimony. And it seemed to calm them down and make it easier for them to testify. And the judges in that county love her to death. She's been able to expand it. She's done a lot of really good stuff. Um, if you there was a guy on TV, Brandon somebody, who uh, was a dog trainer and an animal guy, and she appeared in one of his episodes that you may have seen. Ah, um, yes, Cardinal Glennon. That is a great hospital, a great children's hospital, Cardinal Glennon in St. Louis. Um, and it is a great idea for children because children need compassion. They need some tether to a different reality than the one that they're recounting. And some of their realities were awful. Getting half of a peanut butter sandwich to eat all day long. Uh, Mom not going, not coming home until they were asleep on the couch when they're, 6 years old, and not being interested in fixing them anything for dinner. I mean, just terrible things that happen to those kids. And that's right, Eileen, petting an animal has been shown to lower blood pressure. And, you know, I love my dogs. I've got two of them, Emmy and Ellie. I've probably shown pictures of them on here. If not, I might post a couple when when I get off the chat. But they are an absolute wonder to both of us. Little Emmy, who was maybe 3 pounds when we found her, and she was about 14 weeks old. Somebody had thrown her out in the middle of a parking lot at a mall. on a 106-degree day in Jefferson City, Missouri. And she was running from place to place, I think just trying to find something to eat. And I asked my wife if that dog was, I pointed over there to the dog and I said, "Was that dog, were they attached to the back of that car?" And she said, she shouted, "Stop." And she jumped out of the car and she ran over and grabbed and picked the dog up. And the dog put its head right there on his shoulder, on her shoulder. I knew right then that dog was going home with me. But to be fair, we did call animal control, ask if anybody had lost a dog. They said no. They said, just take it to the pound and push it through the door. There's nobody there over the weekend, but we'll take care of it on Monday. And this was on a Friday night. And there was no way my wife was going to let that happen. So we took it to the vet on Monday morning and had it, we looked for a chip. There was no chip. So we had her chipped. And we said, if anybody calls, called the pound and said, if anybody calls looking for their dog, we don't know what they're talking about. And we never did have anybody call, so I think somebody threw her out intentionally, which is awful. Nobody should ever do that to a dog. And I that's one of the things, I don't know that they can prosecute them hard enough for animal cruelty, particularly people who beat dogs or use dogs in fights. Um, I do believe in second chances, so I'm glad Michael Vick got a second chance after his arrest. I hope that he would never engage in that conduct again. But again, I think that's just hideous behavior. So anyway, Lisa from Missouri uh, reminded me of Lisa, my former secretary, who was just a wonderful person. But we've had a lot of really wonderful people work at the law firm while I was there, and it was kind of an odd situation. Our office was in Jefferson City, and the main office was in Kansas City, and so every year we did a lot of windshield time going back and forth for meetings and stuff like that. So I have seen an awful lot of Missouri. I've seen an awful lot of Kansas. The only way you know you are actually going anywhere in Kansas is because you have to change radio stations. Otherwise, the scenery never changes. So there's my Kansas joke, I guess. Uh, Michael Vick is now a football commentator. Well, he'd probably be pretty good at that. Um, and again, he paid his debt. He went to, he did jail time or whatever it was he did and paid his debt. So, I think at some point there has to be some forgiveness, some compassion for that kind of stuff. Even though I still find the behavior terrible, I have to say, well, I felt bad because I didn't get this on time because of the glitch with the computer software. I really wish that I had been able to heard that about the Midwest. That's true. Let's see, we've got uh, Lisa from Missouri, and she said that, she's from St. Louis, so she's probably not seen a lot of Kansas, but she's probably seen a lot of Illinois and place below, the part of the state below St. Louis, which is pretty interesting. There's a lot of stuff along the Missouri River that's fun to go look at. I love your dog rescue story. All my three cats are rescued from neglected environments. Yeah, that is the ultimate act of compassion and for love for animals is to rescue ones that need to be rescued. Um, our other dog, Ellie, when when our we had an American Eskimo when Amy came to live with us, and the American Eskimo, our first dog, Pearl, she was great. She developed Cushing's disease, and from that it led to diabetes, and we had to give her insulin shots every day. And we kept her alive on insulin for about 6 years. And then when we moved down here to Florida, she got a kidney infection. And despite the vet's best efforts, they just couldn't lick it. And so we wound up having to put her down. And Emmy was so distraught because they'd become pretty fast friends. Emmy was so distraught that she lost down from 7 pounds to 6 pounds. And so we went out and we got Ellie. We searched for a 7-pound Chihuahua mix. And what we got was a Schnauzer Yorkie mix. And that's okay. She was a great dog. The problem that Ellie has is that she was on her own for about a year. We're pretty sure that there had to have been a fire, and during the fire, she got away from them, and the house burned down, and maybe she didn't know how to go back to find those people. So she ran, and it took them quite a while to catch her, and then they turned her over to this agency that would place her. They sent her out twice with other families, and those families brought her back because she couldn't adapt to their families. And my wife assured that woman that she would not be back. And we kept our promise. And she's just been a wonderful dog. And I guarantee you, if a gnat hits the front door, we know about it. She is, she got good hearing and she lets you know if something's not quite right. So that seems to be straying far afield from the legal stuff that we usually do, but I hope everybody has enjoyed that. It's kind of nice to get to know who people are as well as what they do. Maybe that makes some of my content or analysis more understandable. Maybe it doesn't, but I hope that it's been beneficial for you guys. I am thinking of stopping the stream unless somebody's got questions. I'd love to hear any questions anybody has. And seeing none, I'm going to put this on the wait a minute. I'm usually on replay, but I have to say today was a great live stream with a great group. Yeah, the group is what really makes the difference with a live stream. If you get people who are, putting stuff up there and I can respond to it, it makes it a much better thing. So I thank Christina and Aiden and Eileen and Umwell and Lisa and Jim CSI. Love that guy. Loretta Powell. All of you have been very good friends and really contributed today, and I greatly appreciate it. So, with that being said, I'm going to put this on ending soon. And if anybody wants to chat with other people, I'll leave it up for a couple of minutes and then I will close out the broadcast. So, again, my heartfelt thanks to everybody who's participated today.